Hello, my name is Eaman, and I'm a PhD candidate in social and engineering systems at IDSS MIT, where I'm also receiving a secondary PhD in statistics. We're talking about a few projects that outline how networks affect economic outcomes and unequal distribution of information. This picture is taken from recent research by Rod Chetty from Harvard, and it motivated my research. Shows how the chances of upward mobility in the US, comparing the child's income versus the parent's income, is highly dependent on the census tract the child was born in. One of their hypotheses why social mobility is so geographically dependent was that children have different social exposures in different neighborhoods, and their future access to opportunities depend on the social networks they're embedded in. In my opinion, this work was also very related to previous work that showed economic activity is embedded in social networks. So I wanted to dig in more and investigate some micro-level network processes that could create or exacerbate existing inequalities. In the first project, we surveyed 40,000 individuals in a South Asian country for their income. At the same time, we constructed their ego networks based on their phone call records and measured the structural diversity of their networks. Structural diversity is a measure of network structure and captures the amount of novel information that an ego receives from their alters based on the level of redundancy in their networks. We found that, as expected, income is positively correlated with structural diversity, but more interestingly, the marginal effect of structural diversity was higher for individuals in a high status group. The reason for this is that economic information is stratified in groups and networks are homophilous. Combination of these two facts means that networking has higher marginal benefits to high status individuals than low status individuals, a phenomenon that also sociologists refer to as differential in social capital. As the basis of that explanation was the unequal diffusion of information, we attempted to next provide causal evidence of unequal diffusion in networks. We did this in the context of a randomized seeding experiment. We showed that the more is the random number of seeds from a group, the higher is the probability of adoption or receiving the information by other members of that group. This is an obvious effect, mainly driven due to homophily, but to show it causally, we needed a randomized seeding experiment in networks. Next, we wanted to understand how network structure affects unequal diffusion. We found that most of our network models heavily underestimate the observed level of diffusion assortativity. We can think of diffusion assortativity as the level of homophily, not just on paths of length 1, but on longer diffusion paths. Here we compare the predicted diffusion assortativity against its observed value. Top row shows the diffusion assortativity on paths of length 2 and 3, in terms of gender, and the bottom row for ethnicity. For both attributes, we observed that the predicted level of diffusion assortativity by the degree-corrected stochastic block model is consistently lower than the observation in actual networks. Our hypothesis was that the pattern of brokerage that is present in many social networks acts as a bottleneck for diffusion from one group to another. Brokerage happens when a small number of brokers or social bridges account for the majority of connections between the groups. While brokers facilitate the diffusion of information from one group to another, they nevertheless reduce the number of potential diffusion paths compared to a network where cross-group links are equally distributed among all nodes. So we then developed a model that takes into account brokerage or the variation in the level of cross-group linking. The model predictions for diffusion assortativity significantly improved, as you can see here. Finally, in a randomized inline experiment, we studied one mechanism that widens intergroup differences beyond what's expected by independent individual abilities. We designed a multi-round cooperation game in which players had to collect gold. They were randomly assigned to a high or low status group and put in random homophilous networks. High-type players had a higher probability of receiving the location of a gold mine in each round. The players could then share and receive this information from their neighbors, as you can see here. They would then dig a location on the map for gold and finally receive a summary of the game outcome and their neighbor decisions. The experimental data of this game, as well as the Nash equilibrium, suggests that intergroup differences are higher than expected by individual probabilities of receiving the gold. This suggests that networks have mechanisms where members of one group could receive a larger share of the pie than what's expected by their individual abilities. Thank you.